How humans mate every day without breaking down. The secret to our 365-day stamina. In the vast expanse of space, Nexus 9 stood as a testament to cooperation between species, an oasis of learning and understanding. The station was built at the crossroads of 17 different galactic trade routes, a perfect place for alien races to study each other, exchange knowledge, and grow together. Its corridors were sleek, curved, with walls gleaming in soft blue light that seemed almost too perfect to touch. But today, a different kind of energy hummed through the air, something far from peaceful. Dr. Lia Thelian paced nervously in front of the docking bay, her sharp green eyes scanning every movement. Her tight-fitting black leather outfit clung to her form, the blue lights embedded in the fabric flickering in sync with her increasingly erratic heartbeat. The suit was designed to reflect her emotions, a piece of high-tech gear she regretted installing now. It only reminded her of the storm of nerves brewing inside. Today was crucial. Today, she would meet the one species she'd spent years studying, the humans. And more specifically, their reproductive capabilities. Lee had studied countless alien species, from the villain who needed weeks between mating to the divar whose reproductive cycle lasted months. Every species had its limits. But humans, they were an anomaly. They mated every single day without failure, without recovery. Nothing in biological science could explain it. "Focus," Lee muttered, brushing her silvery white hair away from her face, the color of her skin shifting in the dim light. "It's just another research subject." She adjusted her suit and forced a deep breath, but it didn't calm her. Her research had brought her to this moment, but something else had taken hold of her curiosity, a more personal interest. She had studied human physiology for months, but meeting a human in person, standing across from him as flesh and blood, wasn't something she had prepared for. Just as her mind began to wander, the voice of the station's AI interrupted her thoughts. "Attention! Human diplomatic vessel Relentless has completed docking procedures. Passenger disembarking in 3 minutes." Lee's stomach fluttered. She stood straighter, shifting her gaze back to the docking bay doors, waiting for the human who had been sent to Nexus 9 to answer her most pressing question. The door hissed open, and through the swirling mist of the docking bay emerged a figure. Lee's breath caught in her chest. Captain Josh Dillon was taller than she expected. His dark gray armored suit fitted perfectly over his broad frame. His skin was tanned, his muscles visibly defined under the armor, giving him a rugged, almost primal appearance. For a moment, Lee forgot to breathe. She had read reports about humans, seen countless images, but nothing compared to the reality of standing face to face with one. He was larger than life, like something out of a legend. Lee's sharp green eyes widened involuntarily. Her pulse quickened. "Dr. Thelian," Josh greeted, his voice smooth, deep, and strangely warm. It caught Lee off guard. She had expected something more detached, formal, but there was an unexpected kindness in his tone. Lee extended her hand, carefully keeping her composure. "Captain Dillon," she responded, "thank you for agreeing to this consultation." Her fingers trembled slightly as they made contact with his hand. His grip was firm, steady, as if aware of the power he possessed, yet there was a gentleness to it that surprised her. Josh gave her a slight smile, almost as if he was amused by her nervousness. "I'm happy to help," he said. "Advancing interspecies understanding is always important, but I must admit, your request was a bit unusual." Lee nodded quickly, trying to cover up the unease in her voice. "Yes, well, you're a rare specimen. Your species has unique reproductive capabilities. I've been studying human biology, but the more I learn, the more perplexed I become." Josh raised an eyebrow at her words, intrigued. "Perplexed," he repeated, a playful glint appearing in his eyes. She bit her lip, realizing the awkwardness of her phrasing, but it was too late to take it back. "Humans, well, your males can mate every single day. No other species can do that. There's no recovery, no downtime. It's physically impossible by most biological standards. I need to understand how this works." Josh chuckled, his deep laugh filling the space around them. "Well, I'm glad to know that I'm considered perplexing," he said, the humor in his voice making Li's cheeks flush, though she tried to maintain her scientific detachment. She quickly regained her composure and nodded toward the corridor. "Let's move this conversation to my laboratory. We can go over the details there." As they walked together through the gleaming hallways of Nexus 9, Lee couldn't help but steal glances at Josh. He moved with an ease and confidence that she hadn't anticipated. There was something primal about him, a physicality that most of the species she had studied lacked. Even more than that, his presence seemed to command the space around him. His movements were calculated, but effortless. Josh spoke again, breaking her concentration. "This station's impressive," he said, looking around. "We have similar research facilities in the SA system, but nothing quite like Nexus 9. You really have a melting pot of species here." Lee was grateful for the neutral topic. "Nexus 9 is at the crossroads of 17 species, trade routes," she explained. "It makes for an ideal location to study comparative biology. The variety of species here gives us insight into the full spectrum of evolutionary possibilities." As they entered Lee's laboratory, Josh looked around, taking in the large, holographic displays and the various specimens stored in transparent containers. One wall was covered with human anatomical charts, an ongoing project Lee had been working on for weeks. "Looks like you've been doing your homework," Josh remarked, studying the charts. Lee allowed herself a small smile. "I always prepare thoroughly before meeting a new species." She activated the privacy protocols in her lab, ensuring that all sensitive information was securely locked away. This research was important, and she couldn't afford anyone else to hear what she was about to discuss with Josh. "So, Captain," she began, turning back to him, "I need to know how your males can mate every day without any adverse effects. Is there something unique about your biology, some kind of hidden factor I'm missing?" Josh's eyes flickered with amusement. "Well, Doctor, I think you might just need to observe it for yourself." Lee blinked, taken aback. She hadn't expected him to be so forward. But before she could respond, the alarm blared to life, its loud, insistent sound cutting through the tension in the room. "Warning, unidentified vessels approaching. All personnel to emergency stations." Lee's heart skipped a beat as the air around her turned tense. "Raiders," she whispered under her breath, her eyes scanning the security feeds on her console. "They've been targeting research stations lately." Josh's demeanor shifted instantly. His body went from casual to alert in the blink of an eye. "I need to get to my ship," he said, moving toward the door. Lee grabbed his arm before he could reach it. "The docking bay is on the other side of the station. You won't make it before they breach." Their eyes met, the earlier flirtation replaced by a shared understanding of the gravity of the situation. "Then it seems our research will have to wait," Josh said, his voice calm but decisive. "Right now, we need to focus on survival." The words hung in the air between them. The immediate threat was all too real, but in that moment Lee realized something. Her work with humans, and perhaps with Josh, was far from over. The first encounter. The air in Nexus 9 had always felt crisp and sterile, a clean space that hummed with the quiet sounds of interspecies cooperation. But as Captain Josh Dillon stepped off the shuttle and into the docking bay, the station suddenly felt more alive, more real. Lia Thelian's eyes couldn't leave him as he approached, each step more confident than the last. The docking bay, which usually echoed with the hum of machinery and distant conversations, felt oddly silent to her now. It wasn't just the tall figure of the human diplomat that commanded her attention, though. It was something deeper. Josh's figure loomed large in the doorway, dressed in a dark gray armored suit that hugged his frame like it was made for him. His broad shoulders and strong build filled the space, giving off an air of undeniable authority, and yet there was a surprising grace to his movements. He was a soldier, yes, but there was a calmness about him that was almost disarming. Lee had been preparing for weeks, had studied human anatomy to the finest detail, but standing face to face with this human male was an entirely different experience. It was as though her research had suddenly come alive, taking on a presence she hadn't anticipated. Her fingers twitched and she reached up to adjust the collar of her tight-fitting black leather suit. It glowed faintly with blue pulses, reacting to her fluctuating heartbeat. As her heart raced faster, she wished the suit wasn't so responsive. She forced her breath to slow, trying to bring herself back into focus. She had prepared for this moment, she told herself. She had anticipated this interaction, but she didn't expect this. The soft blue lights in the docking bay seemed to shimmer differently as Josh approached. His brown eyes met hers, and for a moment, the entire galaxy seemed to fade into the background. "Dr. Thien," he said, his deep voice cutting through the silence, pulling her back into the present. "Captain Josh Dillon, Earth Diplomatic Corps." His tone was warm, inviting, yet professional. Lee extended her hand, a greeting she had practiced over and over. This moment was meant to be clinical, impersonal, and yet she could feel her pulse racing in her ears. "Captain Dillon," Lee managed, her voice just a little steadier than she felt. "Thank you for agreeing to this consultation." As they shook hands, Lee couldn't help but notice the power in his grip. His hand was warm, firm, nearly overwhelming in its strength, but it didn't feel dangerous. He was careful, almost as if he was trying not to hurt her. It was a subtle yet deliberate kindness that caught her off guard. "Of course, Doctor," he said, smiling. "Advancing understanding between species is part of my job, though I must admit your request. It's not exactly standard." Lee flushed slightly, but she kept her eyes locked on his, refusing to let her nervousness show. "I had to be specific," she replied, brushing a strand of silvery hair behind her ear. "Humans are an anomaly in many ways, and your males, well, they're particularly perplexing." Josh raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. "Perplexing?" Lee's green eyes darkened with the intensity of her curiosity. "Yes. Your males can mate every single day, without needing recovery. No species has this ability. It defies the most basic biological principles I've studied." Josh's lips twitched with a hint of amusement, his gaze softening. "I guess I'm flattered to be your perplexing study," he said, clearly enjoying the challenge she presented. Lee's cheeks darkened with embarrassment, but she pressed on. "I've studied species with long recovery times between mating cycles, Villain, Divar, Corans, but you're different. How can you do it every day? How do your bodies manage that kind of strain?" Josh's smile widened as he leaned against the wall casually, his stance relaxed. "Well, Doctor, I suppose you could say, we're just built differently." Lee's mind raced with possibilities, her thoughts spinning through countless scientific explanations. "Built differently," she repeated, clearly unconvinced. "That's not a biological explanation. You're talking about something almost impossible. Is it some sort of regenerative ability, a unique skeletal structure, or maybe something about the cells themselves?" Josh chuckled softly, his amusement obvious. "Nothing so exotic, I'm afraid. It's simpler than you think. Humans just handle things a bit differently." His eyes twinkled with humor, as if the answer was right there for her to figure out. Frustration bubbled up within Lee. She was no stranger to stubbornness when it came to research, but something about Josh's playful attitude, mixed with his undeniable strength, pushed her to the edge. "You can't expect me to accept such an unsatisfactory answer," she declared, her voice rising slightly. Josh raised his hands in mock surrender. All right, if you really need to know." Lee's breath quickened as she anticipated his next words. What was he about to reveal? Was it some strange, undiscovered biological phenomenon? "Well, if you want the scientific explanation," he began, a teasing smile playing at the corner of his lips, "it's all about adaptability." Lee opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, an alarm blared throughout the station. The AI's voice echoed overhead, its tone urgent. Warning, unidentified vessels approaching. All personnel to emergency stations. Josh's casual demeanor disappeared in an instant. His eyes hardened, his posture shifting from laid back to alert in a split second. Raiders, he muttered under his breath, his hand already moving toward the door. I need to get to my ship. Lee's heart pounded, but not from the question of human biology. No, it was something more immediate now. The docking bay is across the station. They'll breach the station before you can make it. Josh's gaze locked with hers, and in that instant their earlier playful tension vanished, replaced by the raw urgency of the situation. Then it looks like our research will have to wait, Josh said, his voice calm but determined. Right now, we need to focus on survival. Lee nodded quickly, stepping toward the console to activate the lab's security systems. I'm locking down the lab, she said, her voice steady now. We'll need to prepare. Josh didn't hesitate. In an instant, he was already at her side, ready to fight. Lee's scientific mind was still racing, her thoughts a jumble of research and possibilities, but now her only focus was survival. The station's walls shook as a blast reverberated through the structure. The raiders had arrived and the station was under attack, but for Lee and for Josh, it was no longer about studying human biology. It was about staying alive, and Lee realized that the human diplomat, this soldier, would be the one she'd have to rely on if they were going to make it out of this alive. The inexplicable human stamina. The station hummed with an eerie calm after the chaos of the raider attack. Though the damage to Nexus 9 was significant, the immediate threat had been neutralized, leaving behind a tense silence. The walls, once gleaming with pristine light, now showed signs of wear. Lee stood in her lab, her hands trembling as she reviewed her notes on human physiology. The raiders had gone, but the storm inside her mind had only intensified. She couldn't stop thinking about the human male, Captain Josh Dillon, and the peculiar challenge he presented to everything she thought she knew about biology. Lee had spent years working with alien species, countless species that had their own unique methods of reproduction. Most creatures required recovery periods. The villain males needed weeks between mating attempts, while the Devar males required several days. Even the Korans, famous for their rapid reproductive cycles, had a mandatory 48-hour rest between mating. But human males could mate every single day without the need for rest. And that was something Lee couldn't comprehend. She paced back and forth in her lab, the soft hum of the station's emergency repairs providing a steady background noise. Her mind swirled with possibilities. Could there be some hidden biological factor that allowed human males to withstand such strain? Was there a cellular adaptation that no one had discovered? Her research had yielded interesting results, but nothing that could explain such stamina. It was almost as if Captain Dillon were a walking paradox, a biological anomaly that refused to fit into any known framework of xenobiology. The door to the lab slid open, and Josh walked in, his expression professional, but there was a glint in his eyes that told Lee he wasn't just here for science. He had heard her muttering to herself, had seen the frenzy in her eyes when she realized she couldn't solve the puzzle of human endurance. I was wondering when you'd get to this, Josh said, leaning casually against the doorframe. You've been quiet since the attack. Lee didn't look up at him immediately, her fingers tracing the display on her console. You still haven't explained how it's possible, she said, her voice tinged with frustration. I've studied your species, Captain, every aspect of human biology I could find, but I can't reconcile this ability of yours. It doesn't make sense. Josh's smile remained, though his posture shifted slightly, more curious now. What doesn't make sense? That humans can. Keep going, he chuckled, though it was more knowing than teasing. I suppose that's the question you're dying to answer. Lee finally turned to face him, her green eyes narrowing slightly. You think this is a joke? Her voice was sharper than she intended, but she couldn't help it. She had spent days, weeks obsessing over this. And now, standing in front of her, was the living, breathing proof of an enigma that defied all known scientific principles. Josh shook his head slowly, his eyes softening. No, it's not a joke, doctor, but sometimes. It's not about finding the answer you expect. Lee frowned, turning back to the console. But that's the problem. I need an explanation that fits into the framework I know. Something I can understand. Rapid cellular regeneration. A specialized skeletal system. Maybe a unique biochemical process that aids in recovery. You're looking for something that doesn't exist, Josh replied. It's simpler than you think. Lee snapped her attention back to him. Simpler. You're saying I'm overcomplicating this. He gave her a half-smile, the kind that suggested he knew something she didn't. Maybe. I know you're a scientist and I respect that. But sometimes science doesn't have all the answers. Sometimes it's just about adapting. Lee's brow furrowed. Adapting. Josh took a step toward her, his tone shifting from playful to something more serious. Humans are adaptable. We don't just survive, we change to fit the situation. It's what we've been doing for thousands of years, and it's why we're capable of, well, what you're trying to figure out. Lee felt her pulse quicken, not because of his proximity, but because something about what he said struck a chord deep within her. Could it really be that simple? Could human biology, with all its complexities, simply be a result of constant adaptation, of evolution pushing for resilience? Before she could respond, Josh crossed the room and stood next to her console, looking at the charts she had been studying. I don't have a magic answer for you, doctor, but I think you're asking the wrong questions. Lee's eyes flicked to the screen. Her mind raced as the pieces of the puzzle began to shift in her head. What do you mean? Josh's voice dropped slightly and his eyes met hers. You're focusing too much on the biology, the physical. What if it's not about the body at all? Lee blinked. Not about the body. He nodded, his expression serious now. Maybe it's about mindset, about motivation. Humans are driven. We push ourselves beyond what we think we can do, and that drive is what makes us capable of more. It's not just about biology, it's about the will to keep going, no matter the cost. Lee stared at him, her mind still processing. Her scientific mind wanted to dismiss the idea as too abstract, too intangible. But then again, hadn't she learned to trust what her observations told her? And her observations of humans, at least of Josh, seemed to support this. There was something about him, something about humans in general, that made them able to endure. Josh continued, his voice thoughtful. It's about pushing past limits. The body will adapt, sure, but it's the mind that gives you the strength to keep going. If you want to understand human stamina, that's where you need to start. The mental side of things. Lee felt a surge of excitement. This wasn't something she could easily study with instruments or scans. But it was something she could explore, something far more complex and human than anything a lab could measure. I see, she murmured, stepping back from the console. She glanced at Josh, who was watching her closely. So, you're saying human stamina isn't just physical, it's psychological. Josh met her gaze with a calm certainty. Exactly. We don't just survive, we adapt. Lee's scientific curiosity roared back to life, but this time it was different. This wasn't just a question of biology. This was a question about the very nature of humanity, something that could take her research to new places, places she hadn't even thought to explore. Then I'll need to study this, she said, more to herself than to Josh. This, adaptability, the way your mind pushes your body, it's not just a biological mystery, it's a psychological one. Josh smiled, his eyes glinting with something deeper. That's the spirit, doctor. Welcome to the real human mystery. Lee didn't know what her next steps would be, but she was sure of one thing. The answers she sought were no longer just in the anatomy of the human body. They were in the mind, the heart of what made humans so extraordinary. The coming storm. The calm after the storm was deceptive. Nexus 9 had been hit hard, but the damage was manageable, at least on the surface. The station's emergency teams worked tirelessly, patching up walls, restoring power and checking systems. But beneath the surface, something darker stirred. The raiders weren't just interested in technology or resources. They were targeting something far more valuable: the knowledge housed in the station's research labs, and specifically, the research of one very curious xenobiologist. Lia Thelian sat in her lab, running another set of scans on the latest biological samples she had collected. Her thoughts, however, weren't focused on the data in front of her. They kept drifting back to the conversation she had with Captain Josh Dillon. His words echoed in her mind, the idea of human adaptability sparking something inside her that she couldn't quite grasp. She had barely had time to process his theory about human stamina when the station's alarms blared again, louder this time. It wasn't just a drill. This was real. "Raiders again," Lia muttered under her breath, her stomach sinking. It had been too quiet for too long. She knew the raiders weren't done with Nexus 9. They never attacked just once. They came back for more. The station AI's voice echoed throughout the corridors. "Warning. Unidentified vessels approaching. All personnel to emergency stations. Repeat, all personnel to emergency stations." Lia quickly shut down her research console and locked her files. There was no time for hesitation. The station was under attack again, and she had to move fast. As she grabbed her emergency kit, her mind raced. Was it just a coincidence that the raiders had attacked shortly after she started studying human reproductive capabilities? Or was there something more to it? She didn't know, but she had to find out. The door to her lab slid open, and Josh entered, his armored suit gleaming in the dim lighting. He moved with swift precision, the practiced gait of someone who had seen countless battles. His eyes met Lia's, the playful glint from before replaced with a steely focus. "You heard the announcement," he said, his voice steady and calm, the kind of tone that made you feel like everything would be okay if you just listened to him. Lia nodded, feeling the familiar weight of dread in her chest. "The raiders are back," she said, "and I don't think it's a coincidence." Josh raised an eyebrow, glancing over his shoulder. "Coincidence? In a place like this? Maybe not, but we need to move. The security systems are already being stretched thin." Lia felt a surge of urgency. The station's security was already in disarray, and with the raiders coming in hot, they were stretched even thinner than usual. She couldn't afford to waste any time. "Where do we go?" she asked, grabbing her weapon's cache and securing it to her side. Josh's eyes flickered to the window, where the first flash of laser fire lit up the dark expanse of space. "We head for the control center," he said, voice grim. "The raiders will want to disable the station's defense systems, so we need to get there first. Keep the control systems online as long as possible." Lia swallowed hard. The control center was on the opposite side of the station, and there was no guarantee they'd make it there in time. But if they didn't, the entire station would be vulnerable. "Let's move," Lia said, her voice resolute. "And Josh, I'm not leaving without answers." He gave her a quick, almost imperceptible nod. The determination in his eyes was clear. He wasn't going to let her down, not while the raiders were trying to tear the station apart. They'd been through enough together already. They would fight side by side again. As they hurried through the corridors, Lia's mind kept racing. She wasn't just afraid for the station. She was afraid of what the raiders might do if they discovered her research, the data she had gathered on human Nexian compatibility. The possibility that this research was the reason behind the attacks gnawed at her. But there was something else, something she couldn't shake. What if the raiders weren't just after her research? What if they had learned something that even she hadn't discovered yet? Suddenly, the air in the hallway shifted. Lia heard the unmistakable sounds of footsteps, heavy boots marching in rhythm, the low hum of the raiders' equipment vibrating through the station. The emergency lights flickered as the station's power systems struggled to stay online, but Lia and Josh didn't stop. They couldn't afford to stop. "We're close," Josh said, his voice low. "Stick to the plan. Get to the control center. We can't let them disable the defenses." Lee's heart pounded as she followed him, her mind spinning with possibilities. She knew the raiders wouldn't stop at just taking the station's technology. If they got hold of her research, or worse, if they realized what she had discovered about human-Nexian compatibility, they could use it against her. They could use it against everyone. They rounded a corner and Lee caught sight of the control center's entrance just ahead. But as they neared it, the sound of laser fire erupted in the distance. Lee froze, her eyes widening in alarm. "They're already here," she whispered. Josh reacted instantly, pulling Lee behind a reinforced doorframe as the hallway filled with the sound of approaching enemy footsteps. The raiders had breached the outer defenses and were moving quickly toward their position. Lee's breath caught in her throat. There was no escape route. Josh turned to her, his face hard but determined. "We need to make a stand. The control center is just through this hallway. I'll clear the way. You get inside and keep the systems online." Lee opened her mouth to protest, but Josh's eyes were already on the hallway, his hand reaching for his weapon. "Don't argue with me, Lee. We're in this together." The urgency in his voice struck a chord. She wasn't going to back down now. She nodded and followed him as they moved into position. As Josh fired the first shots, Lee slipped into the control center, her fingers flying over the console. Her mind raced as she accessed the station's security systems, locking down critical areas and isolating the invaders. The world outside seemed to fade away as she focused on keeping Nexus 9 from falling into enemy hands. But the reality of the situation was clear. The raiders weren't just trying to steal technology. They were after something far more dangerous, something that only Lee, with her human Nexian research, could fully comprehend. And as she worked, the weight of that knowledge pressed heavily on her shoulders. She was on the brink of discovering something extraordinary. But if the raiders got their hands on it first, everything she had worked for would be lost. A discovery that changes everything. The hum of the station's emergency lights was the only sound as Lee crouched over her console, her fingers flying across the keys in a flurry of urgent commands. The security systems had been patched up, barely, but it was all she could do to ensure the raiders wouldn't breach the control center. The sudden chaos of the attack had thrown everything into disarray, but she couldn't afford distractions, not when she was so close to uncovering the truth. The moment the door had sealed behind her, Lee's mind went into overdrive. Her thoughts were still racing from the earlier conversation with Josh. His words about human adaptability had cracked open a door in her mind she hadn't realized was even there. She had focused so much on the biological and physiological explanations of human endurance that she'd missed the key factor, human psychology. But there was more to it, something even deeper that wasn't just about biology. Lee's hands hovered over the screen as she began running deeper scans of her recent biological data. She needed to confirm what she had suspected. If there was something in the human-Nexian compatibility that went beyond just physical stamina, could it affect something else? Could it create something entirely new? Her thoughts were interrupted as the door to the control center slid open, and Josh stepped inside, his face grim. His armor was scratched and scorched from the firefight, but his eyes were focused, determined. Lee didn't take her eyes off the screen, her thoughts still spinning. "They're retreating for now," Josh said, his voice low. "But we both know that won't last long. How's it going in here?" Lee swallowed, keeping her gaze fixed on the data flashing in front of her. "I don't know how to explain this," she murmured, almost to herself. "The scans are showing something I didn't expect, something impossible." Josh raised an eyebrow, stepping closer to her. "Impossible? What are you seeing?" Lee finally looked up at him, her expression taut with concern. "Captain, the data isn't just about endurance or recovery anymore. It's about genetic compatibility, human and Nexian genetics. But the scans, they're showing something else. I can't believe it, but the results are clear. It looks like I'm pregnant." Josh froze for a moment, processing her words. His breath caught in his chest, but Lee didn't wait for him to respond. She couldn't. This wasn't just a scientific curiosity anymore. It was real. She felt a strange tightness in her chest, a mix of excitement and terror. How could this happen? How could she, a Nexian, carry a child with a human? She stepped back from the console, her hands trembling. It doesn't make sense. Human Nexian reproduction, biologically, it shouldn't be possible. Our genetics are too different. There's no way this could happen naturally. Josh stepped forward, his expression hardening with concern. "Lee, take a breath," he said quietly, his voice surprisingly gentle. "I know this doesn't make sense, but it doesn't mean it's impossible. What exactly are you seeing?" Lee moved toward the console, her eyes glued to the screen as if she could somehow will the data to make sense. The scans show human and Nexian DNA sequences woven together, but not just a mix. It's a hybrid, a combination that's far more stable than I could have ever predicted. The kind of compatibility that shouldn't exist. Josh's face shifted. He understood. He wasn't just looking at a scientific discovery. He was seeing something that could change everything. "You're saying we've created a hybrid?" he asked, voice softer now, almost incredulous. Lee nodded, still processing the shock herself. "I don't know how, but yes, it's a hybrid." Her thoughts raced as she tried to make sense of the implications. Could this happen with other species too? Was this unique to humans and Nexians? If they could conceive a child, what did it mean for the rest of the galaxy? What did it mean for their future? As Lee tried to gather herself, she caught a flicker of movement in the corner of her vision. The small observation window in the control center showed a flickering light, followed by a shadow, a figure outside the station, packing like a predator. Lee froze. "Josh," she whispered, her voice shaking, "do you see that?" Josh's eyes narrowed as he turned toward the window. His hand instinctively went to his weapon. "That's not just a shadow," he muttered. "We've got company." Lee's heart skipped a beat. "Raiders already." Josh shook his head, stepping back from the window. "No, not raiders, something else. They're moving too quietly." A cold dread settled over Lee. The raiders had been bad enough, but whatever was outside now, it wasn't the typical raiding party. "What do we do?" she asked, her mind racing with all the possible outcomes. "We can't leave this data behind, not when we've just confirmed." Josh stepped toward her, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. His voice was calm, controlled, yet there was a fire beneath it. "We'll get to that later," he said. "For now, we need to focus on keeping you safe. The station isn't going to last much longer without help." Lee felt the weight of his words. He was right. This wasn't just about the research anymore. This was about survival. "I can't leave this," she said, her voice strained. "Not now, not with what we've just discovered." Josh hesitated for a moment before nodding. "I know, we'll secure the data, but we need to keep moving. Whoever or whatever that is outside, they won't hesitate to take everything." Lee glanced back at the data on the screen, her heart heavy. This discovery, this impossible child they had created, was the key to a new future, one that could change the galaxy. But now it was more than that. It was the reason the raiders had attacked in the first place. And worse, it was the reason they were now under siege. "We need to keep this secret," she said, her voice resolute. "We can't let anyone know what we've found, not yet." Josh gave her a look that was equal parts understanding and determination. "Agreed," he said. "We'll figure this out together." The station's alarm system blared again, the noise deafening as another breach was detected. The raiders weren't just trying to steal technology anymore. They were after something far more dangerous. Lee took a deep breath. She had uncovered the truth, but now she had to protect it and survive long enough to understand exactly what this discovery meant for their future. The unraveling. The control center was silent now, save for the occasional hum of malfunctioning systems and the soft hiss of emergency air vents. Lee stood motionless in front of her console, the weight of the discovery settling heavily on her shoulders. The hybrid child, the impossibility of it, human and Nexian DNA intertwined in a way that should have been biologically unthinkable. But the data didn't lie. There was no denying it. Her mind buzzed with questions. How? Why? The implications were astronomical. She had never considered this scenario, never dared to entertain the thought that human and Nexian biology could intersect in such a profound way. Yet here she was, holding the key to something that could change the very fabric of interspecies relations. But that wasn't all. The raiders hadn't just attacked the station for technology or resources. They had attacked for this, the very research that had brought Lee to this realization. They knew. Somehow they had known about the possibility of human Nexian reproduction, or had they just stumbled upon it? Either way, it didn't matter now. The consequences of this discovery were far too great. Lee, Josh's voice broke through her thoughts, pulling her back into the present. He stood in the doorway of the control center, his silhouette framed by the dim emergency lights. His face was hard, but his eyes held a flicker of concern. We need to move, now. Lee looked up, startled by the urgency in his tone. She hadn't realized how long she had been standing there, lost in the gravity of her findings. She quickly glanced at the data one more time, making sure it was locked down tight, and then turned to face him. Josh was already moving toward her, his steps quick and purposeful. "The raiders have breached the lower levels," he continued, his voice steady but full of purpose. "We've got maybe 10 minutes before they reach this section. We need to get you out of here before they find out what you've been working on." Lee's heart raced. "I can't just leave," she protested, her voice strained. "I have to make sure the data is safe. This could change everything. We can't let it fall into the wrong hands." Josh paused, his expression softening as he approached. "I know, Lee, I know. But right now, we're both the only ones who know about this. And the longer we stay here, the more likely it is that the raiders will get their hands on your research. We need to get out alive." The weight of his words sank in. She had always been the one to prioritize the data, the research, the knowledge. But now, standing in the midst of crisis, Lee realized that survival had to come first. The research wasn't going anywhere, but if they didn't get out now, it would all be for nothing. She nodded, her resolve hardening. "You're right, let's go." Josh moved swiftly, checking his weapons, while Lee secured the control center's data as best as she could. She knew there were still holes in the station's defenses, and the raiders were relentless. If they figured out what she had discovered, they would stop at nothing to take it from her. Her hands shook as she locked the last terminal, the data encrypted in layers of security. Josh gave her a brief nod, signaling that they were ready. "This way," he said, leading her toward the hallway. "We're taking the back route to the emergency docking bay. It's the only chance we've got." Lee followed him closely, her mind still racing with the new reality she was facing. A human Nexian hybrid. She could still hardly wrap her mind around the idea, let alone the potential it held. Could it be the first of many such hybrids? Was this the key to breaking down barriers between species, or would it create new ones? As they moved through the station, the once bustling halls now felt eerily deserted, the low hum of distant explosions vibrating through the walls. The sound of heavy footsteps echoed in the distance, growing closer with each passing second. "They're getting closer," Lee whispered, her voice tight with tension. Josh nodded, his face set with determination. "We're almost there, just stay close." They passed through a narrow corridor, the walls flickering with static from damaged systems. Lee's heart pounded in her chest as she thought about the consequences of what she'd found. What if it was too dangerous? What if the raiders were right to target Nexus 9 to hunt down the research? Her hybrid child, if it could be called that, was a symbol of what could happen when two worlds collided. But would it lead to peace or destruction? Josh suddenly stopped, holding his hand up to signal for quiet. Lee froze, her breath catching in her throat. She could hear it now, footsteps, fast and heavy, closing in on them from the opposite end of the corridor. "Raiders," Josh muttered under his breath. "Get ready." Before Lee could react, Josh pulled her into a side room, the door hissing shut behind them just as the raiders rounded the corner. The two of them crouched in the shadows, their weapons drawn and ready. Lee's pulse quickened, her entire body tense as the sound of the raiders' boots grew louder. She could hear their muttered commands, their voices harsh as they moved through the hallway. She swallowed, trying to steady herself. This wasn't just a fight for survival. It was a fight for everything she had learned, the truth of human-Nexian compatibility, the fragile future of their species. Josh's hand was on her arm, steadying her. "Stay quiet," he whispered. "We wait until they pass, then we move." Lee nodded, her mind still consumed by the storm of thoughts swirling in her head. The research, the hybrid child, wasn't just a scientific breakthrough. It was a challenge to everything they had believed about the boundaries between species. But now, in this quiet, tense moment, she realized that perhaps it was more than that. It wasn't just about breaking down barriers. It was about understanding each other on a deeper level. As the sound of the raiders' footsteps faded into the distance, Lee exhaled slowly, feeling the tension in her body begin to ease. Josh motioned for her to follow, and they moved silently through the shadows, each step carrying them closer to the unknown. But Lee couldn't help the nagging feeling that the real battle was just beginning. She didn't know what the future held, whether the hybrid child would be a symbol of hope or a new weapon to be exploited. But she knew one thing for certain: this was no longer just about survival. This was about reshaping everything the galaxy thought it knew about species, about love, and about the very nature of life itself. And Lia Thelian would make sure the truth was protected, no matter what it took. Future no one expected. The emergency docking bay was colder than the rest of Nexus 9. Its lights flickered weakly, reflecting off the metallic walls and casting long, uneasy shadows. Lee and Josh slipped inside, closing the hatch behind them. For a moment, the world went silent. No raiders, no alarms, just the faint hum of the backup generators struggling to stay alive. Lee pressed her hand against the panel to seal the door, ensuring the raiders couldn't trace them for a few precious minutes. Her heart thudded in her chest, not from fear alone, but from the weight of what she carried inside her. A hybrid child, a life that wasn't supposed to exist, a life that could change everything. Josh stayed by the hatch, listening for footsteps. When he finally stepped toward her, there was something different in his expression, something steady, determined, almost fierce. "Lee," he said quietly, "we're not going to outrun this forever. The raiders, the council, someone is going to want answers." Lee nodded. She knew he was right. Once the truth got out, it wouldn't just affect her or Josh. This discovery would echo across entire civilizations. Some would see it as hope, others might see it as a threat. The galaxy feared what it didn't understand. And right now, what Lee carried was beyond understanding. She stepped closer to Josh. "We'll have to be careful," she said. "My research alone could cause political chaos, and if anyone finds out about the pregnancy..." Josh's jaw tightened. "Then we protect them, whatever it takes." For the first time since she discovered the hybrid, Lee allowed herself to breathe. Not everything was solved, but at least she wasn't alone. Suddenly, the docking bay lights dimmed further, this time not from power loss, but from a station-wide lockdown. A message flickered across the wall panel. "Unauthorized vessels departing, raiders retreating." Josh let out a tense breath. "Looks like the fight over." "For now," Lee added, because she knew this wasn't the end. The raiders wouldn't withdraw without a reason. Something or someone had forced them back. The dock doors slid open, and Commander Halk strode in with a team of security officers behind him. His deep blue skin was streaked with soot, and a long tear ran down one shoulder of his uniform. Even so, he carried himself with the firm authority of someone used to surviving chaos. Dr. Thien, Captain Dillon. He glanced around, relieved. We've secured the station. The raiders are gone. Casualties are minimal. Lee exchanged a look with Josh, a short, silent moment of resolution. They both knew the truth couldn't stay hidden forever, but this wasn't the time to reveal it. Commander, Josh said calmly, we'll need full access to the research sectors. We have information the raiders were after. Halk frowned. Information, what kind? Lee stepped forward, her voice steady. A breakthrough in compatibility research, something that could explain why the raiders were so persistent. She didn't lie, not exactly. She simply withheld the part the galaxy wasn't ready for. Halk's gaze lingered on her for a long moment, as if trying to read the truth in her expression. Finally, he nodded. I'll assign security. Whatever they wanted, we'll make sure they don't get it next time. As he left, Lee felt Josh's hand brush hers, a small gesture, quiet, strong. It grounded her more than anything else. Days passed, then weeks. Nexus 9 entered a period of rebuilding. Panels were replaced, power grids restored. Life returned slowly, carefully. But beneath the everyday repairs, a deeper transformation was taking place. Lee and Josh worked side by side, strengthening security protocols, reviewing intercepted raider data, and trying to understand how their discovery might ripple outward. Lee ran scan after scan, each one confirming what she already knew. The hybrid child was healthy, stable, and developing at a rate that defied both human and Nexian expectations, a symbol of something new. And though fear lingered, so did wonder. One quiet evening, Lee stood by the large observation window overlooking the stars. The station drifted peacefully now, far calmer than the storm they had survived. Josh joined her, leaning on the railing. You're thinking again, he said with a small smile. Always, Lee replied, her hand resting over the place where new life grew. This changes everything, Josh, for me, for you, for our species. For the galaxy, Josh added. They fell silent, watching the stars shimmer against the darkness. The unknown stretched infinitely before them, but for the first time, Lee didn't fear it. What do we do now? Lee finally asked. Josh looked at her, his expression steady and sure. We tell the truth, he said, when the time is right, when the galaxy is ready, not before. Lee nodded, and until then. Josh smiled faintly. We protect our future. Warmth washed through her, not just from him but from everything they had survived together. She knew there were challenges ahead, political battles, scientific scrutiny, threats from those who saw new life as danger, not possibility. But she also knew something else. Human stamina wasn't about strength alone. It was about perseverance, adaptation, hope. The same qualities that brought Josh Dillon to Nexus 9 were the ones that would guide the galaxy into a new era, one neither human nor Nexian could have predicted. Lee took his hand. Then we move forward, she said softly. Together. And as the stars glimmered beyond the window, the future of two species, and the beginning of something entirely new, shone just as brightly. If you enjoyed this video, please like it, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell icon for more amazing videos.